Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Ramirez. I'm part of Harvard Alumni for Education. We are three co-directors for Latin America, for the Latin America region. We have Gustavo Rojas that is here with us, Patti Vasquez from Mexicanos Primero. She's right now in a meeting, but she's going to be late to join us, and myself. And also we have 4 different coordinators in Latin America that also help us to promote this agenda of sharing and all the different resources that we can get from the region. This is not just a space for Harvard alumni, it's a space for anyone that is working on education. That way we have Peter, Ivana, Maria, and Ingrid also supporting us. And today we have a very special guest, an amazing person that is with us. Is Dominic. Dominic is the director of the Center for Education Transformation at Salzburg Global. He's going to speak about different things. And actually, when I was reviewing all the information from Salzburg Global, they have so many initiatives, and also he's involved in so many things that is amazing. We're going to see so many things that he can share, but also how do you manage your life, Dominic, because it's amazing what you have accomplished. With all of this, just welcome, Dominic, to this space. We're very glad to have you here. We're going to have around 30 minutes of different questions that we have prepared with Gustavo, and 15 minutes, 20 minutes of questions and answers from people that is joining us. If you have a question and you're part of the community that is here, please put it on the chat, and we will ask you to open your mic and share with us the question, or you can ask us also to read the question too. With that, we are going to start with Gustavo.
Thank you, Eric. And just a short reminder for everybody on the chat, if you just joined, please say hi to everyone by sharing your name, organization, and work. We would love to see where people are joining in from. The last webinar, we had folks joining in from a lot of different locations, and that's always very exciting because it sparks up the conversation. So Dominic, to get us started, and this is, I agree with Eric, it is very impressive to look at your resume and learn about the impressive amount of initiatives that you are currently engaging with. But one might think that the most important one is definitely around the work of Salzburg Global initiative. So I would ask you to share with our audience today, what is Salzburg Global Center for Education Transformation, and how from their efforts you guys are trying to shape the global education agenda, and particularly focusing on their role in convening diverse actors for dialogue, action, and collaboration.
Yeah, happily. Thank you, Gustavo, and thank you, Eric, for the warm welcome and the invitation. So let me start with the institution where I do most of my work, which is Salzburg Global. So Salzburg Global was founded just after the Second World War, as part of a wave of civil society-led peace-building initiatives. We were founded by 2 Americans and an Austrian who were all at Harvard in the post-war period. And they were looking at the news coverage of the Marshall Plan and how the US investment in the economic reconstruction of Europe was beginning to help societies move forward. And they were interested in starting what came to be referred to as a Marshall Plan for the mind. So it was a very human-centered approach to convening that could bring together people who'd been on different sides during World War II, who now needed to find ways of speaking to each other, ways of talking to one another where they'd lost those channels and those opportunities for collaboration. Initially, the focus was very transatlantic, and over time, particularly in the late 1950s and 60s, the focus of the work became much more global. The name changed to become Salzburg Global. But that sort of foundational DNA of bringing together a group of people who are working on a common challenge or a common issue, and then creating the right conditions for them to be able to speak with one another, to build trust and understanding, to share their insights and what they knew to be true in their contexts, but then also talk quite candidly about the barriers and the challenges they face in their work, so that we can start to think about new kinds of collaboration or new kinds of insight that can drive change, still characterize the vast majority of the work that we do here today. So nowadays, the work is organized around 5 program pillars. So we have work in education, work in culture, in peace and justice, in finance and governance, and in health. And if you think, we call them pillars because it's a little bit like the UNESCO temple icon, that if you've got those 5 pillars, if a society or a country has those 5 pillars, then they've got stable foundations to be able to provide a roof that can offer shelter and protection for all sorts of different population groups to thrive and flourish. All of our education work happens under the auspices of the Center for Education Transformation that we established back in 2022. And I think, like a great many organizations, we went through a period of accelerated understanding during COVID about ways in which education systems were perpetuating a certain kind of status quo that was reinforcing all sorts of inequalities, structural inequalities, societal inequalities. COVID was remarkable for how it shone a light on different inequalities within and between education systems. It was also happening concurrently with massive social justice, social change movements like Black Lives Matters in many parts of the world, like Me Too. It was happening concurrently with a significant escalation of understanding of how the climate crisis was affecting different communities in very different ways. And there were so many examples of how education systems were perpetuating a certain kind of status quo that had helped an elite in the 19th and 20th century, but wasn't right for 21st century societies. And so we started to think, we're quite a small organization, and we started to think about how we could use the kind of convening that we do, where we build networks or we build communities of practice who are focused on specific issues, to support this idea of education system transformation.
Thank you, Dominic. It's so many things that you have mentioned right now. In other way, that's why we call this webinar, and we are going to focus on this webinar in the power of collectiveness. In other way, it will be fantastic, like with all the different things that you have seen since 2022, just to speak more about the different challenges that you have seen around this kind of collectiveness and what is happening in education worldwide. What you have seen that are the most important challenges, and also how how different people, organizations, governments are working collectively to try to solve them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the question that sort of vexes all of us in this discussion, I imagine. But there are some challenges which are very specific to the education sector. I think so. Things like the global teacher crisis, where there are so many millions of teachers missing from the education workforce. Since COVID, that trend has been accelerated. It is harder to recruit people into the teaching profession, and more people are leaving than are coming into it. There is a global learning crisis that has been exacerbated by COVID, where so many students around the world are not in the right grade for their age or for their level of learning. Then there are other crises that COVID has made worse, like a global youth mental health crisis, and education systems haven't historically been calibrated to support young people's well-being and mental health, let alone teachers' well-being and mental health. Although Mexico is a fine example of a system that did try very hard to invest in that through I think it was called Construyete initiative, that looked at social and emotional training for Mexican educators before it became a program for students. But Mexico is an outlier in that respect. Most systems haven't focused on that. You then have multiple ways in which the climate crisis is beginning to impact on education and the education experience. And there is the ever-increasing risk of polarization fueled by AI or bad actors driving divisions. So all of these challenges cut across different societies and cut across different education systems, and are one of the reasons why we're trying so hard to build new models of collaboration, because we feel that the solutions to these challenges won't come out of any individual system or any individual school. They will be an outcome of collective intelligence and people working together to develop new ways of tackling these challenges.
Dominic, the whole idea of collective is based on an also very important concept, which is that of collaboration. And you just mentioned new models of collaboration, and you spoke about collective or systemic intelligence. And in the invitation for this webinar, we referenced UN Secretary General António Guterres' words in the Transforming Education Summit back in 2022. And his statement about learning to live and work together, and these more particular notions of problem solving and collaboration. So we're very eager to learn from your perspective, what does effective collaboration look like, right? Particularly under the umbrella of education transformation, but how is it different from more traditional partnerships, or even from, let's say, just mere coordination between stakeholders?
That's a brilliant question. So it was a fantastic moment when the Secretary General referenced that. It was the opening of the Transforming Education Summit. It was the largest education convening in 60 years, I think someone said in it. And it had a sort of watershed moment. Whether it's fully delivered on that potential is up for discussion. But at the time, to hear the Secretary General saying that, you know, effective successful education systems in the future were going to be the ones that prioritized collaboration above competition was a very powerful message. So I think, and what I'd really like to do to properly answer your question is share some insights from some work that we were involved in last year with the Brookings Institute. So during UN General Assembly last year, we ran something called a collaboration cafe in partnership with the Brookings Institution. And we had about 60 participants at that. And it produced some really interesting insights around collaboration and the hallmarks of really effective collaboration. So we distilled a lot of this into a short report that Rachel Dill at the Brookings Institution produced. And in her final report, she talked about key characteristics of effective collaboration, being very cognizant of different power dynamics that can exist within collaboration, being completely open about those, acknowledging the inequality that goes into many kinds of collaboration, and then looking to leverage the strengths and the unique value proposition that each actor brings to the partnership. We talked a lot about the value of diverse actors and collaboration between not just the usual suspects or usual voices, but having a diverse collaborative partnership. There is, as people on this call will well know, you know, an amazing wealth of evidence that shows how diverse teams make better decisions, diverse organizations are more successful. That needs to also be better reflected, I think, in different kinds of collaboration. So the more diversity there is in terms of the types of organizations, the backgrounds of the individuals who are leading it, the more successful collaborations can be. We talked about the importance of being completely open and upfront at the beginning, that collaboration is often harder work than working alone. It can lead to better results, but it can take longer to get there, or it can be more complex. It can involve difficult conversations about resource allocation and recognition for the different parts of work. But the results that come out of it can very often be significantly better than that which an individual organization would be able to achieve. Yeah, so I mean, I could go on and on about this. I'm conscious that we've only got about 30 minutes for the whole conversation, but they were the kind of core characteristics, I think, that came out from this diverse discussion about the hallmarks of effective collaboration. There was also a lot of interesting discussion about, you know, barriers that are still, you know, in some contexts insurmountable. So, you know, so the time factor came up a lot. The fact that we have a tendency as a society to recognize individual success above and beyond collaborative success. The issue of who gets to actually lead and be part of these collaborations is often a barrier to having more diverse actors involved, because it comes down to who has budget to travel or the opportunity or the access to networks to be able to be involved. So there were lots of interesting things that, even at this point in 2025, still feel like significant barriers to collaboration. But there was also a lot of good insight around why it's such an important thing to focus on.
Thank you, Dominic. It's fantastic to speak about these different strategies in the way that the collaboration can be helpful. You mentioned something that I want to revert again, that is the power dynamics in that way when you are doing collaboration, and how, and just looking into all the people that are here, how do you manage this power collaboration when you feel that you are on a small player in a very big pond with so many people doing different things, maybe globally or regionally, you are working in one community? And how do you make sure that this diversity and the voice of everybody allows to be heard from everybody? What have you seen that is helpful? What is working on this? And what are the main barriers to suddenly not having this kind of conversation?
So when we are putting together the kind of programs that we host here in Salzburg, then we lean very heavily into a co-creation methodology. And we found this to be incredibly helpful for sowing all sorts of different seeds that make collaboration possible. So I think, before we really started working in this way, we would quite often hear from participants in programs that they felt a high degree of imposter syndrome, that you're kind of there on the first day, you're going to be in a group of 50 people for 5 days and everyone's doing their introductions. And, half the room feels like they oughtn't be in the room because they're not qualified enough, or they're not old enough, or they're not experienced enough, whatever it might be. And, as the people who were organizing these kind of convenings, we had a really clear sense of why everyone who was in the room was there and what they were bringing. And we wanted to think about new ways in which that could be made more visible to everyone else. So we started to develop this co-creation methodology, where we now, in the sort of 2 to 3 months before the group meets in Salzburg, we go through quite a structured process to build the program based on the priority concerns and interests of the people who are coming. And we then take the key questions that come out of this and build the program narrative around those key questions, dividing it up into a series of modules. The modules are then led by volunteers from within the group who want to sort of either feed into the design of those modules or the delivery of them, and thinking about the kind of learning pathway that they want to take the whole group on or through as they address whatever the key concern of that module might be. And what this has done really effectively is it helps everyone get past that feeling of imposter syndrome. Everyone has been able to contribute to the design of the experience. There is a genuine sense of co-ownership. No one is coming to give a keynote and then disappear, for example, or there are very few panel discussions where there's that sort of separation between the experts on the stage and the audience who's there to absorb and listen. I think for the kind of work that we do with relatively small groups, it creates a really interesting dynamic, where as many voices as want to be heard who are in the group have the opportunity to contribute and design. And it's helped us with some really interesting outcomes since we kind of pivoted to this way of working. So that it's a kind of, it's an interesting space to occupy, because when we think about system transformation, the role of an organization like Salzburg Global isn't to lead that system transformation work at all. It's to try to create conditions that will help the people who are doing the real work or doing the much harder work of system transformation expand their networks, or learn from other systems, or develop new relationships or new partners that can help them in that work.
The whole notion of education transformation is not only systemic, but is rather diverse, in the sense that you might think of it in terms of like academics, right? And addressing some of the pressing challenges around that. You mentioned several crises intersecting in the education landscape. You mentioned everything regarding teacher shortages around the globe, right? Which is a problem that currently faces many education systems. However, we know you're also engaged in different initiatives that target, for instance, issues such as what we might call youth disengagement,
Yeah.
right? Or in the positive version, like how can we empower youth globally as relevant stakeholders and agents of this change. And also you lead initiatives regarding the socio-emotional component, which also feels very, very important for this idea of transformation. So would you share with us insights from Karanga, from Youth Voice? There are also relevant initiatives in your portfolio that might provide insights as to how to build successful collaboration.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So the work on intergenerational collaboration came out of the Transforming Education Summit in many ways. And there were, and you know, as someone who organizes convenings, I'm acutely conscious of how easy it is to be critical of events from the outside and when you're not part of them. But one of the things that did feel true for multiple people's experience of Transforming Education Summit is that on day one, there were an awful lot of youth leaders very visible on the main stage in the UN. And by day three, they were virtually invisible. Or if they were still on the stage, they were kind of given almost thankless task of moderating a panel with 10 ministers of education, none of whom were sticking to time or to the brief. And it felt slightly tokenistic, or that they were in some way pushed to the side. And in conversations after that with a lot of those youth leaders, you know, we heard repeatedly a variation on the idea that actually a focus on youth leadership is almost an abdication of responsibility from previous generations at this point in time. And what we need are new ideas about intergenerational collaboration and ways of bringing together the sort of value of lived experience and professional experience with different worldviews and people who are at an earlier stage in their careers. And so out of a lot of those conversations, we were able to put together a program here in Salzburg that tried to meet that challenge head on. So we worked with amazing youth-led activist networks like Restless Development, like Youth by Youth. We also work with more established organizations like Porticus, like Teach for All, like Cambridge University, and put together this consortium who then collaborated for about 6 months to produce a guide on intergenerational collaboration. Because one of the things that we'd realized was there was very little literature out there that actually set out, you know, good principles for thinking about how you work across different generations. So if it's okay, I can put a link in the chat here to the guide, because it still stands up quite well. It's only a couple of years old. And it was through that I got to be more involved with Youth by Youth. Youth by Youth is an amazing organization. They use language in the most exciting and fantastic ways, I think. So they are a youth-led organization, very much focused on sort of global hubs. So hubs across Africa and different parts, or particularly in Africa, but other parts of the world as well, that look at the local manifestation of global challenges, to put it right, particularly around education and the environment. And they have what they call a wisdom council, which is, or that they've also referred to as adult allies in other times, which is a relatively small group who work with the Youth by Youth leadership team in what they've called bi-directional mentoring initiatives, or there as a kind of sounding board. So yeah, thank you for putting the link to Youth by Youth's website in the chat. And they organize a fantastic education festival immediately after the Learning Planet Festival in January of each year, and are a wonderful organization to engage with and follow their work. Karanga is the social emotional learning network that grew out of a series of programs that we hosted in Salzburg across 2018 and 2019. Karanga is a Maori word. One of the co-founders is part Maori from New Zealand. And in the Maori language, karanga means a call out in welcome. And so we wanted to build this global community of SEL, of educators who were interested in social and emotional learning or who were using it as part of their work. Social and emotional skills are such a core part of effective collaboration. There's all the work around empathy, around emotional regulation, around critical thinking and communication and trust, and all those different things that the SEL helps develop. So I think it is difficult to imagine an effective collaborator who doesn't also have good, strong social and emotional skills too.
Fantastic. And you, Dominic, you started to mention Karanga, Youth by Youth, but you have so many initiatives that you are part with. One that caught my eye was about this one called Education House. Could you share also a little bit more about Education House and what it's about, and also about these initiatives, how we can get involved?
Yeah, of course, we would love you all to be involved. So Education House is relatively new. It's something that we started with Teach for All and with 100, the Finnish Education Innovation Network, and there are many other partners involved as well. But we sort of thinking of two core purposes for Education House. So one is to be a physical space that can be at global convenings where education isn't always top of the agenda. So we were very lucky last week in New York that Teach for America offered their buildings, their building in Broadway, where they have 4 amazing conference rooms, conference spaces, and we could put on a day of Education House activities there. So we had about 19 different events across the day, the vast majority of which were hosted by organizations that had never hosted anything during UN General Assembly Week before because of the prohibitive cost of finding venues and space. And it meant the whole of the Tuesday, there was just a great focus on education in the city. Lots of people came up and for one event and then stayed for the day. So I think there were 19 events across the day, mixture of, quite high level events involving networks of ministers of education to much more grassroots initiatives. And we tried to accommodate as much of it as possible. The other aspect of Education House is a sort of a commitment to a global process of collaborative learning. So one of the very legitimate criticisms of lots of international convenings is that there's only a small group of people who can ever be there, even with something as vast as UN General Assembly Week. It's a relatively small number of organizations that can actually be there and put things on and create the conditions for their voices to be heard. So we were thinking about a kind of collaborative learning agenda that any organization could contribute to, no matter how big or small they were. And it would be built around one shared question that we would commit for the next 6 months to trying to answer. So the question that we've settled on is, what will it take to equip students to shape a better future? And this is going to be the next aspect of the Education House website to go up, is exactly how you get involved. But it doesn't matter if you're, UNESCO and you're organizing a massive event for 2,000 people, or if you're a tiny teachers association in the southwest corner of England or whatever it might be. If you would like to devote time to addressing that shared learning question in your education convening, then there'll be a mechanism whereby you can upload your insights and what you found to be true with the question to this shared learning book. And once a month or once every 2 months, we'll do a synthesis of it so that the next conference that comes along in the process or the next convening can pick up the conversation where the predecessor got to. And then after 6 months, we'll collate all the insights and try to publish something that could be available as a comment. So it's a new experiment and a way of trying to think about how do we create a much more porous opportunity for collaboration and sharing insights that organizations of any size can be part of and contribute to. So we're going to take Education House next to Doha, and the day after the World Innovation Summit in Education, there'll be an Education House event at the National Library in Qatar. And then we're exploring ways in which we could have a physical space in Davos, for example, at the World Economic Forum, or at COPs, or at the Skull World Forum, at some of these other big global convenings where, because of the breadth of the agenda, education might not be front and center. And can we provide a kind of focus opportunity on education at these different convenings?
Dominic, now we want to take it to a more local level, perhaps. The conversation, as we shared early during this webinar, there are a lot of friends that are joining from different parts of Latin America. And very paradoxically, this is a region where we share a lot of cultural traits, values, language. In most of the region, the main language is Spanish. However, innovative models to spread collaboration across this region, particularly focused in the idea of transforming education, of course, still feel a little scarce, still feel a little, like, yeah, we can see how the conversation evolves at the global level, but it doesn't feel like Latin America is particularly being like a major driver of that conversation. And at the same time, it's not like we're also having like a very strong conversation within our same region. So I'm very curious to learn from your perspective, what are collaborative models that you feel might be relevant, both to serve as blueprints of how collaboration can be fostered within the region, or what are the best opportunities for Latin America to connect with the rest of the world in terms of collaboration?
I don't know the region that well, so I'm slightly hesitant to offer too much advice. But what I could say is, we at Salzburg Global in the education work, we've been incredibly lucky over the last few years to have two very strong Mexican partner organizations at different times. So we worked with a lot of the social and emotional learning work, and then some of the subsequent programs. We worked very closely with Atentamente, and that was a fantastic collaboration. And they were, they both participated in programs, and they were also introduced us or recommended other Mexican participants to come into the program. And more recently, and I don't know whether Patty is on the call yet, or if she's going to be able to join, but with Mexicanos Primero, we have this fantastic evolving relationship where they are supporting different Mexican participants to come into different education programs over the course of each year. And we're sort of trying to think how we can use the way in which we design and build programs in Salzburg could be helpful for other partners' work in the region. And we'd be really keen, to continue to explore this. We've had the chance to work with the Inter-American Development Bank on social and emotional programs as well, who are also building some interesting networks that were spanning across the region. When Caranga first started, we had a very strong Latin American chapter of Caranga, and were able to put on a number of conferences that were in Spanish and Portuguese as well, that were online conferences that were targeted specifically, in terms of time zone and speakers and content for a Latin American audience. So it feels like there is a very strong appetite for greater collaboration in the region, and that there are some brilliant organizations like Mexicanos Primero, who we've had the chance to work with, who are actively trying to catalyze this kind of collaboration. But like I said, I'm not super familiar with the whole region. So,
but it's quite interesting, Dominic. Something that you have shared is to leverage technology to in a way push collaboration around. It doesn't have to be like, okay, you have to organize a big conference. You can also set up like different systems that allow this kind of collaboration. And you have mentioned and you have shared with Education House, for example. In that way, most of the time, I think that we believe that we have to host like a big conference and with everybody, it becomes very expensive, and sometimes it's difficult for everybody to participate. In that way, which websites have you seen that promote this kind of collaboration that are the most effective? And also, what you have to do to really continue with the conversation. That's what you have mentioned, like, okay, we're going to put this website, we're going to collect all the different comments from different people for 6 months and then publish something. In that way, how do you make it like everybody is aware of it, of these efforts? And it's a nice way to really promote collaboration without having like uh, or doing like different events in so many cities or so many countries and allowing people just to speak it or just talk about conference. In that way, is very dynamic what you are presenting here.
I mean, so when we're going through the co-creation and collaboration process for the programs that we host here, then we use a mixture of Mural as a kind of online collaboration platform. So it's like an online whiteboard where people can ideate and develop their thinking, and then you get a kind of a capture of the different thinkings that go into that co-creation process that the rest of the group can access it. It's great for asynchronous collaboration as well, because we can host a call at 3 o'clock in the afternoon Salzburg time that works for most people, but for some people, because of other commitments or time zones, they can still contribute to the co-creation process outside of that official call. We also have a community platform called Mobilize that Salzburg Global has a license for, which is built by a company called Forge, that we use for each of the programs to build communities of practice, which is very helpful. Our partners at the Learning Planet Institute in Paris have a fantastic space on their website, which I think is just called Projects, which is an open source collaboration space for anyone working in education to access, and you can contact Learning Planet to get access to that. But that's a free resource, which has massive potential, I think, to kind of accelerate the different kinds of collaboration that are happening around the world. Now, I think that there's been a sort of interesting arc, hasn't there, over, there was a time early in COVID lockdowns where you'd have, it was incredibly easy to get 1,000 people on a webinar like this, or the online conferences proliferated and expanded, and then there was that big period of sort of Zoom fatigue that set in, and I think we're beginning to turn that around, and different kinds of online collaboration have massive value. Particularly when you think about the kind of climate cost of putting on a big physical in-person conference, let alone all the other costs that can go into that. So I suspect we'll see a resurgence of online conferencing and collaboration and fewer bigger conferences, in-person conferences, for multiple different reasons. There's also, the very real financial crisis in education affecting so many different actors and systems and civil society organizations. And so looking for new ways of bringing people together feels like, both the right thing to be doing and the smart thing to be doing at this point in time.
Dominic, we are about to enter the Q&A part of this webinar, so we are inviting everyone that has a question for Dominic to raise their hand using the button function, or to post their question on the chat box, and then we will know that you want to talk directly to Dominic and you can ask the question yourself. But just to finish up at least this part of the conversation, and thinking about the future, because the event was framed as hope for a better collaboration in education. So despite the challenges, what gives you hope when we think about educational collaboration and transformation?
I think that in many ways, the political appetite for more radical system transformation has shifted in the last few years. It isn't true everywhere, and some, there have been some societies which have moved in a different direction. But broadly speaking, there is, I think, a more sincere and genuine appetite for rethinking education systems, and we're seeing that come through different kinds of collaboration. So the intergenerational aspect, or the thinking about voices at the center and voices at the periphery, and issues of representation in curriculum and textbooks, and what that means for students from different communities is beginning to change and shift. There's, coming out of COVID, but then also thinking about the 2030 agenda and the fact that Sustainable Development Goal 4 is significantly off track has also created, I think, different political opportunities for driving through more radical system transformation. So I think that is a big source of hope, that it feels like there is this interesting opportunity that may not have existed before, despite the fact that things can feel quite bleak a lot of the time, this year in particular. But there are interesting case studies coming through of significant system-led transformation. There was a really brilliant piece of work that a group called Big Change produced back in 2021, I think it was. It was called A New Education Story, and it looked at shifts in the power, purpose, and practice of education, and had some really interesting insights about how you can change mindset and belief as a way of encouraging system transformation. So it's a website called A New Education Story now, and is well worth checking out, and is also full of lots of good stories of hope and really powerful teacher-led initiatives, student-led initiatives, system leader-led initiatives that were bringing about positive change. So despite the fact that things can feel very bleak in 2025, I think there are an awful lot of pockets for hope and optimism, particularly in the education space. Yeah, thank you, Gustavo. That's the link.
Yes.
Thank you as well earlier for putting Constituyete link up there, because I think when I pronounced it, I'm not sure anyone who speaks Spanish might have actually known what I was talking about. Thank you for putting the proper link in.
Thank you, Dominic. I want to, before, like, if anyone has a question, please let us know and we can share it with the chat, within the chat, or we can ask you to participate. But I have is more about something that I was very impressed with you, Dominic, that I have seen you that you participate in so many networks. In that way, you are involved with so many initiatives, the Digital Promise, the Learning Future, the Learning Economy Foundation, so many initiatives that are around. In that way, what will be recommendations for all of us that are here to get involved in so many things that are happening in the world? I think that sometimes we see that or we diminish the way that we can participate. Just we exclude ourselves on these conversations. But how do you do it? How is your main idea that have allowed you to really participate in so many networks?
I read a really interesting book a couple of years ago called Range by David Epstein, I think his name was, and the subtitle is The Case for Generalists in a Specialized World, and it's got some really interesting points about how I feel very lucky in the job that I get to do with Salzburg Global and with these other networks, that you don't actually have to do the doing of the system transformation, the really hard work. The role that you play is trying to connect lots of different people who are doing that frontline work, which is much more complex and much more necessary. But what we try to do, across the whole organization and in the education pillar here in particular, is to know just enough about different education initiatives or reforms that you can connect people who really ought to be talking to one another, because they're doing powerful work in different contexts and they could learn from one another. And I think that's an easier role to play in lots of ways than actually doing the frontline work of system transformation. But it is hopefully also a useful role to be able to play. The other aspect of it, I think, is just staying curious, because there are so many amazing education innovations taking place at the moment all around the world. For all the risk and the threat that AI and new technologies can bring, and the dangers of screen time and the impact of social media on mental health and all of these, very real risks and threats, there is also a fantastic tech-enabled wave of innovation coming into education that is making all sorts of things possible that wouldn't even have been dreamt of 5-10 years ago.
Amazing. So Eric, I don't see any questions on the chat. So
because I've been talking too much. Sorry.
So we do have a raised hand. So I'll pass it to Alejandro, and then we'll go to Natalie. She has a question also on the chat. So Alejandro, go ahead.
Thank you, Gustavo. I will be mindful with the time. And I'm pleased to meet you, Dominic. I work at Mexicanos Primero, and we are trying to understand how to rebuild the ecosystem from connecting between people. I mean, recognizing that none can work alone anymore. Trying to advocate for better quality education in Mexico has been a huge effort established by Patricia, our president, recognizing the vulnerability of the organization. And that's something that has been quite powerful to connect within the ecosystem. And my main question could be, which narratives have you found useful to connect with the financial sector? Because we are starting to witness a fatigue from waiting for systemic change. So even though there's a will within organizations to connect, to talk, to gather, to recognize from the vulnerability what needs to be done, and as a collective, there's also an exhaustion from the financial sector on waiting for systemic change. So there's also a temptation to go back to assistance help and stop financing research for education, stop financing advocacy, everything that can be represented as a push towards the state, as activism. So in terms of funding collaboration, which is the narrative that you have found useful to connect with philanthropists, with founders, in terms of it's worth to finance not the solutions to the problems, not financing the offer, but financing the conditions so NGOs and collectives can be sustained and can survive all this push around the system.
There's good research across multiple different sectors about where innovation comes from within an ecosystem. And a lot of the research shows that innovation quite often begins at the edges and then works its way into the center. So I think one of the interesting conversations to have with philanthropy around the value of funding networks is to help that network stay connected, because the innovation may well not be coming out of New York or Singapore or Hong Kong or either big global centers or cities that have an amazing reputation for their education achievements and prowess, but it's also thinking about the innovations that can start on the margins or from places that aren't front and center in these global narratives, and then feed their way in to genuinely change the system. So I think that's one powerful line of conversation to explore. Another one is also the kind of thinking about what business says it wants and what the economy and the private sector says it wants in terms of the pipeline of workforce coming through. And this has been true for so many years now, but hasn't yet converted into real change in classroom practice in many, many systems. So to stick with social and emotional skills, because we've talked about this for a while, for more than a decade now, the World Economic Forum and McKinsey and other, analogous institutions have been saying, the most employable skills are, broadly speaking, the social and emotional ones. It's not the coding, it's not the presentation skills, it's the empathy and the emotional regulation and the critical thinking and these things. So, there is a sort of supply and demand aspect to this, and getting more investment in helping education systems pivot to develop those kinds of skills is going to be good for the economy and good for wider society. But the last piece, I think that has been interesting in some of the conversations we've been in recently is thinking about, and that this was part of the kind of founding vision for Karanga, is thinking about an intervention like social and emotional learning as a critical part of the system's response to multiple different challenges. So the return on investment that you get from something like social and emotional learning, or something like nature-based education, which has been another focus area for us in the last few years, is fantastic, because it's helping address all sorts of responses to multiple different challenges. So there is that sort of, that return on investment or bang for the buck. I hope that was helpful, Alejandro. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Dominic. Thank you for this talk. I just wanted to add a bit of a clarifying comment to my question on the chat. My question is more about the evaluation that you've put into practice that can be responsive to the kind of inevitable structural differences involved between two or more collaborating initiatives. So my question comes from personally collaborating with Indigenous Mexican researchers who are particularly focused on the conditions that nourish student autonomy on the one hand and integrate Indigenous learning to teacher training institutions, more Western, academically established institutions on the other. And in this relationship with them, as well as in other previous work, where we also relied on non-human ecosystem examples for collaborative endeavors and in the development of professional skills in the workforce, all of them kind of come to this focal point for me in terms of how do you create evaluation that allows the system to turn while it is in this liminal space of transition, while the greater system is still requesting from us, to justify our endeavors and to allocate the budget based on maybe old or traditional grading systems, while you're trying to transition to this new form of collaboration. How do you evaluate that success and demonstrate that success while preserving the integrity of the relationships that already exist in the system?
That's a brilliant question. It's a tough one with just 4 minutes left on the webinar. But I think by way of answer, perhaps I could refer you to work of another partner organization called the Learning Economy Foundation, who've been doing some really interesting work with digital skills wallets over the last few years, and a way in which students can build a kind of portfolio of what they've learned from different experiences, both within school and outside of school, that can exist alongside the more conventional high stakes testings that they're still involved in, because that's still the pathway in the majority of systems into higher education, which is still the pathway into a certain level of employment. So what Learning Economy Foundation have been doing in really exciting ways is thinking about how do you build something that can exist and supplement the existing system, but may well become, the dominant form of recognition and assessment. Because it's about creating value and currency, isn't it? And that's, I'm from England, and in England, it's GCSEs and A levels for an awful lot of students is the currency of education. It's not the only thing in town, but to get into university, certainly when I was at school, then that was the most valuable currency. And what Learning Economy Foundation are doing in very interesting ways is thinking about creating additional currencies that have value, that demonstrate the learning that can come from all sorts of different life experiences, as well as what you're doing in school, that is then evidence-based, so that it can be shown to an employer or to a university or a college entrance interview context as a way of supplementing or going alongside the kind of academic recognition.
Very interesting.
Did that answer the question? I hope that was
it
sort of
did,
a
and
partial answer.
You're right. It is a long discussion, isn't it? Just the metaphor of the currency, the kind of this engagement with value that is another confirmation of the greater systems way of looking at value.
Mm.
So it does allow for the transition, and I wonder to what extent, and are there other metaphors that can be used outside of currency, right? But it sounds like a very effective model, and I'll definitely look into it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if it would be helpful to speak with them, then please let me know, and I'd be happy to make an introduction.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Eric, do you want to close us today?
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, Dominic, for this participation with us here in Harvard Alumni for Education. Gustavo has shared in the chat where you can join also for different events that we have. Just join the conversation. We're trying to create a network of collaboration in Latin America to collaborate with these kind of initiatives as the one with Dominic, but also with everybody that is in the region, with other events that they have that you might have. We are going to share again all the different links that we put together for you. That also one of them, and I'm sharing, Dominic, your LinkedIn profile for people just to get connected with you.
Thank you.
In that way, if you want to reach to Dominic, please do so. And we want more people to participate with Salzburg Global in different initiatives that you are leading, Dominic. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I've put my email address in the chat if anyone would like to connect afterwards. And yeah, thank you so much for the chance to be part of this.
We'll see everybody soon. Bye.
Goodbye.